So this is first edition, the first edition of the Khudilar campaign, World Diagnosis of Fleet Street. That is the newspapers published from London in the UK and are wrongly called the national newspapers. They are not national. They are Little England-centric titles that deny the existence of the rest of the world. Now, this one obviously appears to be not denying the existence of the rest of the world, but that is a pretense because they are going through the motions and giving a tokenistic mention to Joe Biden after yesterday's formal inauguration in Washington, D.C. Now, this one is on page 8, the last page of the business section of the Boris Graph. Boris Johnson was openly and unlawfully and illegally and offensively to basic democracy promoted by Donald Trump over 5 years. And Boris Johnson reciprocated, more than reciprocated, by echoing Trump and protecting the image of Donald Trump as against the claims that he was inciting hatred, inciting racism, and inciting criminality. Now, we said all of that at the time when he started in 2015, but it has taken the rest of the media, the world's so-called media and the Fleet Street, to catch up. It has taken 5 years. And it wasn't until after the actual riot on the American Capitol that Fleet Street began to grudgingly, reluctantly, and unspontaneously and dishonestly recognize that something very bad was being done by Donald Trump. So we should be talking about that more in later parts of this program and also in the coming days and weeks and months. Now, back to the Boris Graph business section, which is 8 pages long. And the main lead item is about supermarket staff being insulted and attacked and threatened by customers refusing to wear the mask. This is a picture of the cooperative food chain. It's called Co-op Food. It's Joe Whitfield is the chief executive of the Co-op food chain. And they are saying that she's saying that thousands of incidents are taking place as workers are asked to police lockdown rules. So says Joe Whitfield. Now, this is most likely on the facts to be concerning the behavior of the brainwashed gullibles who are also identifiable as Little Englanders. When they go to other countries for football matches, on many occasions they are found to be behaving as if they own the streets of those countries or the cities they visit. So there is a brainlessness. There is a brainlessness in the brainwashed people belonging to the Little England mentality. They don't recognize other people, they don't recognize other cultures, they don't recognize other countries. And our continuing evidential fact-based narrative says that to them, Little England is in every sense greater, bigger than the rest of the world put together. So what they're doing in the shops, when they go to the shops, without wearing the mask and without maintaining the social distancing rules, is behaving with that attitude. And that attitude is, in fact, personified by Boris Johnson and his cabal, which is why Britain, the UK, has got the highest numbers of casualties and rates of the infection, because most of the Johnson cabal, including Johnson himself, have been lying from day one and have been in denial from day one. And yesterday, when Anne Widdecombe, Doris Karloff put a piece in the legacy, the poisonous legacy left behind by Beaverbrook, she actually openly said that the NHS did not deserve to be supported with funding and other infrastructure programs that would make it fit to deliver health care and health support and health service to all at the point of need. She openly said that. So it's not like they are whispering or they are not coming out openly against the existence of the NHS. They're saying it openly. And so far, this is now more than 24 hours since the Daily Express actually published that piece by Anne Widdecombe, Doris Karloff. There has been no comment, as far as we can see. There has been no comment, let alone denunciation, in the name of the Labour Party, which is numerically the opposition in the UK House of Commons. And that actually shows why, for nearly 80 years since the idea of the NHS was launched, the NHS has been left unfit for purpose, left unfunded or wrongly funded, because most of the main funding has gone into big business, pharmas, and consultants' pockets, not into equipping appropriately trained personnel necessary for a fit health service that is fit for the needs of the people who need the health service at the point of needs. So the Boris graph in today's paper, which is today's Boris graph, is number 51,532, and its current price is £2.50 in the shops, and it's Thursday, the 21st of January, 2021. That's the page 1 photo of the inauguration of Joe Biden yesterday, Wednesday, the 20th of January, 2021. And the quote is, "End this uncivil war." And there is on page 2, there is an item about the London, the mayor at the expense of London in the name of London. Sadiq Khan having lost a car-free roads court right now. That is something that ideologically opposing. So it's environmentally dangerous for London, bad for London, unhealthy for London to have too many cars in London. So this court battle is saying that the mayor of London took advantage of the pandemic to push through more cycle lanes and road closures to make the capital car free. The High Court has ruled. In an embarrassing defeat for Sadiq Khan, 2 black cab drivers organizations have proved the mayor's schemes to promote walking and cycling were seriously flawed and not a rational response to issues created by COVID-19. So in her judgment, Mrs. Justice Lang ordered Mr. Khan and Transport for London to reconsider and substantially amend its street space policy and a ban on taxis on a bus-only road because it was both unfair and irrational to introduce such extreme measures. And so on. Now the point is that the rationality and fairness concepts are being invoked in that reported ruling without acknowledging the impact, the environmental impact, the health impact. And it's only an instruction or an order to amend. It is not a conclusive rejection of the whole scheme. So the Daily Telegraph, the Boris Graph headline, Khan loses car-free roads court fight is wrong, untrue. So this is the part 1 of the Khudilar campaign, World Exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street. And that is our diagnosis, that the Boris Graph is lying in the headline in reporting that particular court episode. Now, these are the pages that carry the photographs, pages 4 and 5 of the Boris Graph, which is what is called broadsheet size. So it's a bigger than tabloid, twice the size of the tabloids. And so take up twice the space. And so these are the pictures these are some of the pictures they have selected of the events in Washington, D.C. yesterday. And the main picture is, of course, Joe Biden and his family, I suppose. Let's see what they're saying. And so they're showing so Biden and his family, yes, it's his son Hunter Biden and his daughter Ashley and his wife Jill. And we shall be, of course, looking at lots more pictures. Of the new president in the time to come. The point we have made already online is, what is the Democratic Party going to do despite the fact that the rhetoric says that it's a new beginning and all the rest of it, is Biden going to deliver what society, what democracy, what the country, what the people have been waiting for, not just for the last 5 years, for a very long time. And in the cycle of events, since at least the Watergate break-in by the Richard Nixon crew, the Democratic Party has not delivered democracy. And the outrage that Donald Trump created every single day, every single minute of every single day, has not been matched by the response that has been warranted by the ethics and the morality of the Democratic Party as a whole. There have been individual members of the Democratic Party who have expressed various aspects of moral outrage and ethical kind of concerns. But the Democratic Party machine has been and remains part of the status quo that suits, allows the likes of Donald Trump and Ted Cruz and similar others. And the Democratic Party, the restoration by Biden of America's membership of the World Health Organization and the return to the Paris Treaty on Environment, these are tokens. The entirety of the American foreign policy, military expenditure, and the operation of the police, the colonialist, racist, oppressive, murderous aspects of the police, this must be scrapped, and he has not made any mention of that. If he has, it is not mentionable, let's say. It's not significant. That list, that is. And there is nothing in the Boris graph, of course, there would be nothing like what we are saying. Joe Biden has missed or left out. So we shall come to that in due course and later. And one of the things that the Boris graph is kind of confidently reporting is that big tech companies are hoping to avoid US regulation, as new White House team has full to-do list. Tech is not as high on the national agenda compared to other pressing issues. They will get to it eventually. So that proves the point that the regulation and the holding to account the big tech companies and giants is not there on the top list for the new administration fronted by Joe Biden. And there is further proof today, admission by the Boris graph business section on page 1. It says FARLA deadline could be shifted again after double dip recession threat deepens. Now, it's not taking back control. The economy after Brexit is not moving to the heights of the world domination. The global Britain that the lying Brexiteering cabal repeatedly promoted and propagated, aided and abetted by the platforms given to it by the Boris graph, which we are reading. And this article about FALA deadline could be shifted again after double deep recession threat deepens, shows that the economy is not functioning, is it? And they can blame the COVID-19, but it's not COVID-19 that is causing the main problem. In today's Guardian, the Guardian of Thursday, the cover has got a picture of Biden at the center of the big picture. with the headline, Democracy Has Prevailed. President Joseph R. Biden Jr. Well, democracy really has not prevailed. It is tinkering with democracy. That is what has been happening. It's not actually prevailing democracy, defending democracy, because all the ills that were exposed during Trump's incumbency are continuing, are going to continue. Lack of justice, lack of fairness, lack of non-racist treatment and behavior and attitude, and the lack of recognition of the long overdue rights and claims of the original nations, and the lack of respect and recognition and equal treatment to the people of African and Asian backgrounds, quite separately from the duties owed to the people, the descendants of the slavery and the slave trade. So democracy has prevailed is a platitude. It's not a fact. It doesn't refer to any actual action by the American presidency. Biden sets out to heal a divided country at the beginning of new era, says The Guardian. And in the speech they highlight, we shall be looking at the speech as they highlight, and we shall show that the highlight or the highlighting is racist and in denial. See, white supremacy is not the same thing. Referring to white supremacy is not the same thing as opposing racism, is not the same thing as acknowledging the serious violations of the human rights of the people targeted by racism every day. So they say millions of jobs have been lost. Hundreds of thousands of businesses closed. A cry for racial justice, some 400 years in the making, moves us. Now, that sentence, 400 years, or that phrase, the 400 years in the making, is completely dishonest. Absolutely dishonest. And whoever crafted this, scripted this, is dishonest and racist. It says the dream of justice for all will be deferred no longer. A cry for survival comes from the planet itself, a cry that cannot be any more desperate or any more clear now. The rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism that we must confront and we will defeat. Now, what is the speech saying about the rest of the world? Not a lot. And The Guardian is typically stupid not to talk about that. And they're promoting Biden's, the same picture with Biden and his son, Hunter Biden. The reason why Hunter Biden is important is because that was the target. That was the name, that was the son that Trump targeted in his factually, accurately perceived kind of strategy. Because although Biden was a late entrant to the contest for the Democratic candidature, Biden was the one that was likely to get the candidacy based on the various factors dominating the American political system, so called. So Trump was correct to identify Biden as the main rival, which is why he indulged in and engaged in the serial accusations and lies and interference with the Ukrainian kind of political regime. The idea was to force Biden to stop, to not move his pursuit to become candidate. That was the idea. And Jonathan Fraudland on The Guardian, he has got a headline to his piece, or the piece with his byline, and breathe out. The world dares to hope madness will give way to return of sanity. Now that's not true. What has happened in Washington is not a return to sanity. And madness has not ended. These are only items in the Fleet Street papers. These are not reality. These are fantasies. They are not reporting the facts from the ground. They are not reporting the facts on poverty, hunger, famine, and the massive, horrifying pileup of nuclear, biological warfare equipment. Anyone who thinks that the current virus, the COVID-19, is the only one, of course, is not thinking on the facts. What actually is waiting that may get out of the laboratories and the containers, whatever where they're containing them, can destroy the world, destroy the entire living world, planet. That's what has been created by the biological warfare kind of laboratories and technicians and scientists and crews. And Tony Blair will never kind of stop poking about issues that are in the news. And he's doing the same thing with the food and hunger and child poverty thing now. Because the child poverty thing has now, in Britain, has got, in terms of the mainstream, the traction, that is to say, it is being recognized more than it has been before. But about child poverty and the definition of child poverty, we don't believe that there is a thing called child poverty. What there is poverty that affects people of all age groups and ages. By calling it child poverty, they are denying that reality. And they are also denying the reality of people who are looking after children. People who are looking after children are in poverty as well, the children that are called child poor. And they're also denying the fact of the other fragmentation of the lives by poverty, by homelessness, lack of housing, human rights. And they are also denying the real machine, the engine, the democratically kind of plausible machine of liars, machine manned and womaned by thousands of liars employed in local councils, hundreds of thousands of liars employed in local councils who are daily making decisions that add to the poverty and hunger and deprivation that they had already created to the individuals and to families and parents and single parents of all descriptions. So therefore, what the Fleet Street Papers do, they actually do even less than tinker with the facts and the evidence. They don't say, for example, when they talk about child poverty, they don't say what happens to individuals crushed into poverty by a decision or the serial decisions made by local county courts or magistrates courts or by the local councils or by an agency of the government that is unaccountable, that is given impunity from accountability for its corrupt and intentionally, willfully corrupt decisions violating all the rights of the person affected by their corrupt and lying decisions made in contravention, in brazen contravention of the obligations that decisions makers should be under, according to the UK's continuing status as a signatory to international treaties, obligations, declarations, agreements, conventions. And so therefore, when Blair backs calls for a new child poverty strategy amid warning of tipping point, what they're actually doing is adding Blair to the list of those morally concerned people, morally concerned about poverty and about the need to end poverty. And that is a lying agenda, because Blair is a liar whose legacy in creating poverty and deprivation will outlive him by many, many decades, if not longer. And in Tower Hamlets in London's East End, Blair used John Prescott as his so-called deputy prime minister, who enforced the corrupt and brazenly poverty and hunger creating removal of thousands of council housing stock from the control of the local council and gave those away, or made the council give away the stock to mainly two gangs of criminals operating under Poplar Harka and Tower Hamlets community housing. So Blair is not at all fit name to be mentioned as a name that has got the wisdom or the intelligence, let alone the compassion and the care or the commitment to end poverty. Blair is the one that desocialized the council housing in Tower Hamlets. The biggest such acts of poverty creation done through destruction of council that is public kind of say on housing human rights done anywhere in England. So Blair is wrong to be given or it is wrong of The Guardian and any other part of the Fleet Street media to give Blair any such platform, because he's a criminal. He's a big-time criminal who has committed, perpetrated crimes worth billions and billions and billions. And Blair is actually placing himself in the spotlight that has been created about poverty of poor families by other campaigns, the campaigners that have been forced to recognize the increasing poverty and starvation affecting people, individuals and families, and the children in them. Quite apart from that, there isn't in place anything like an accountable forum that can deliver accountability for the failures of the poverty creators to meet the legal and human, that is based on humanitarian needs of the people affected by and attacked by poverty being targeted to be inflicted on them. And amazingly, there is a headline in the journal in today's Guardian and there is this headline, just what I have been talking about. And this headline is uncannily kind of reminiscent of what we have been saying. The problem is poverty. That is what this headline says. However, we try to label it. That is an absolutely correct headline to a piece that is byline to a Bengali origin, that is West Bengal origin, member of the Guardian staff called Aditya Chakraborty. Now, the Aditya is phonetically spelled correctly, but the Chakraborty is not correctly spelled. Now, why that is not clear, but it can be found. We can access that, but it's not relevant to the substance of what we are talking about in the context of the role of the Fleet Street newspapers. Let's see if the contents of this Aditya Chakraborty piece actually compensates for answers the condemnation that I have just in the last 10 minutes outlined. It says, how ingenious are the British. Like the legendary Inuit people who coined 57 words for snow, we have devised a long list of clever aliases for the stuff that dominates everyday life. Know the ones I mean? Try food poverty, fuel poverty, child poverty. Remember what he said? That child poverty is a fantasy. Clothing poverty, transport poverty, period poverty. These are phrases mouthed in Westminster and plastered across newspapers, which this week are discussing digital poverty. They help shape the UK in the 21st century. But this ever-growing jungle of subcategories obscures the one true problem they have in common. It is poverty. That is accurate. The condition of not having enough money to live your life. If your only choice of an evening is between skipping dinner or going to sleep in the cold before waking up in the cold, then you are not carefully selecting between food poverty and fuel poverty, like some expense account diner hovering over the French Reds on a wine list. You are simply impoverished. If you are using a sock as a sanitary towel, the problem lies not in the time of the month, but in your lack of income which doubtless means you are also not getting enough food or heating. So let's see what the rest of this piece says. That is a description of poverty, but not the cause. So the last paragraph of this Aditya Chakravarti piece about poverty is this. The new language of poverty, so managerial and sophisticated, conceals a vast and growing baseness. However highly evolved its jargon, however lauded its campaigning footballers, Britain in 2021 treats poor people, not as our family, friends, neighbors. Instead, it views them as a ragbag of different physical needs to be met by a patchwork of largely volunteer organizations. And in doing so, we deny both their essential humanity and ours. Now, that is only an introduction. That is not anywhere near what the problem is and what we have been outlining and updating on and clarifying and exposing. Is not talking about the causes of poverty. This is a kind of general, and I shall come to the technique. This is a general technique used by, let's say, quote, professional Fleet Street writers, journalists. He wants to keep his spot there on the Guardian or any other paper, similar kind of title, other titles in the collection called Fleet Street, or comparable outlets like on the LBC. There are a few kind of presenters who make this kind of general kind of pieces of concern without actually specifically identifying the main corruption, and the main intent, the main agenda, and the main criminality. So we shall be coming to discussing more about the Guardian piece. Let's look at the rest of the front pages. I said the rest of the front pages because it's front pages on the Fleet Street papers on the day after the new incumbent was inaugurated as president of the USA. And the Daily Telegraph has, of course, done the one thing we have already covered, but the Express, the Beaverbrook, is repeating the same thing, the need to end this uncivil war. But the main headline, the splash at the bottom, is big moment for US and Britain. And that is completely wrong equation, untruthful equation, and dishonest equation, because all the statements made from the conservatives starting in 2015 when Donald Trump launched himself as the candidate, all the statements, including the one which apparently earlier, initially, when Johnson wasn't prime minister, of course, or leader of the conservative, but his initial response was based on prevarication because he wasn't sure whether Trump was going to get elected, so-called. But that was slightly kind of critical of Trump, not significantly or sufficiently critical, but it was slightly critical in the way that Johnson does this dishonest, two-faced options, most notoriously done during the Brexit referendum. He prepared two speeches, one in the case of the Remainers winning the referendum, and the other in the event of the Brexiteers winning the referendum. So he produced the Brexiteers version. And similarly, when he commented on Donald Trump's initial launching of himself as the candidate for the presidency of the USA, Johnson was doing exactly the same thing. He was leaving room for later conversion to a full-scale follower of the Trump administration and the Trump kind of agenda, which he did. So this one, big moment for US and Britain, doesn't reflect what the last 5 years have been in terms of the UK government and the UK Conservatives and the Fleet Street kind of capitulating, capitulating to Donald Trump and the agenda, and accommodating him and his agenda, and denying the severe damage to the health of democratic debate that Donald Trump inflicted, and the further violation of human rights of the targets of racism that he represented, and also, in particular, in context, the further denial of rights of the Muslims that were targeted by Trump's anti-Muslim big speech. Let's ban all Muslims. Nothing compared to that, no other statement compared to that declaration of war of hatred against people for their religion, for their faith. So there is nothing in the Express that acknowledges that. Nothing in the headline, nothing in the content, nothing in the copy, nothing in the other comments. And Trump has pardoned the fascist Steve Bannon. And here are the 2 pages of pictures of Trump and Melania, and other pictures featuring Bannon and others. Now, Trump is not only a racist, a fascist, and a hater, but also a deeply sick-makingly corrupt, immoral, shameless individual. Has been so throughout his life. Now, what is this one they're talking about in this little item about Greta Thunberg? Now, Greta Thunberg poked fun at Donald Trump as he left the White House. The teenage climate activist tweeted an image of him boarding Marine One. She captioned it, "He seems like a very happy old man, looking forward to a bright and wonderful future. So nice to see." It was an almost word-for-word parody of Trump's remarks when she addressed the Davos summit last year. Trump has been permanently banned from Twitter, so will not be able to respond. So that is Greta Thunberg. On this side, there she is. And she has had a number of exchanges with Trump before Trump was banned. Now we shall be talking More about that in due course, of course. But we have to say what the Labour Party just about managed to get in the Beaverbrook's lying, suppress the truth. It is saying the Labour Party accusing Boris Johnson of Trump-like behavior. But they're not doing that really, truthfully. It's a plug by the stooge Lisa Nandy. Lisa Nandy is not representative of most values of the Labour Party or most of the founding values of the Labour Party, which was founded 100 plus years ago, and which values, the Labour Party's founding values, were practiced in their campaign for the ratepayers of Poplar by the Poplar councillors in 1921. This is 100 years since they did that, and we shall be continuing on the marking of that exemplary set of behavior by the Poplar councillors. Laudatory, exemplary, democratic trend setters, example setters, but their trends and examples were not followed by later kind of careerists exploiting the name of Labour councillors. And the fact that Lisa Nandy is given the spot in a piece by the Beaverbrook Daily suppresses Deputy Political Editor Sam Lister does not constitute truthful reporting. Because Lisa Nandy was one of the liars that the Tories favored throughout the whole period in the lead up to the 2019 general election. Nandy was kind of installed very dubiously and without any substance based on her record over the previous 20 years, that she had either the morality or the intelligence or the compassion to be given the platform, that she was somehow on a better level than supporters of Jeremy Corbyn at the time. Lisa Nandy is a liar who is, in terms of the agenda, in terms of the narrative, she is the carrier of the virus of lies and hatred and racism that her controllers actually have tasked her to do, which is what is the explanation as to why she is being misrepresented as being the voice of the Labour Party against Boris Johnson. There is no such thing as Trump-like behavior. What Boris Johnson has been doing in public life, in career as an MP, and so on, has been predating Trump in office. Trump only came into office in 2016, but Boris Johnson has been in office for longer. And Johnson has been allowed to tell lies, allowed to deny the truth, allowed to spew anti-Muslim hatred, allowed to incite anti-Liverpool or anti-poor people in Britain hatred and narrative. And none of the Fleet Street papers really, even up to today, the day after Trump was ousted from the White House, none of the Fleet Street papers has actually published even 10% of the facts and the evidence that exist in the public domain, listing the lies, the intentional lies, the racism, the hatred, and the contradiction of Boris Johnson. And Boris Johnson's unfitness matters. Boris Johnson's unfitness in public life matters so directly and devastatingly that thousands, literally thousands of people have been losing their lives because of the unfitness of Boris Johnson. The numbers of people so far killed by the pandemic or the unfitness regime of the Boris Johnson fronted cabal exceeds the numbers of people, British people so-called, who died during the Second European War. Think about it. Now, in this edition of the Daily Beaverbrook, there is a piece by this woman, Virginia Blackburn. And she's leading her column today with the headline, "Anyone who has lost a pet knows the pain." Now, this is, of course, a direct reference to Miranda Hart and her loss of her beloved dog, Peggy, which the Daily Mail has been kind of reporting on more than the others. And she writes, "Poor Miranda Hart, as the entire country goes quietly insane, not so quietly in some cases, under this interminable lockdown, she has lost her constant companion, Peggy. Her dog, the 13-year-old child, Shih Tzu." Now, this is a name from another language, probably Japanese, became almost as well known as Miranda herself. And Miranda has lost the dog, leaving her, that is Miranda, so shaken that the poor woman has taken a career break to get away from it all. Now, we have been talking about the attack on the Kitten's house in Brick Lane in August 2012, and we shall be continuing that today. It's not just the physical loss of one particular pet. There is no mention in that piece or in the Daily Mail versions about the attacks on pets and animals that take place every single day in London, in England, in Britain, in the UK, in the rest of the world. And the attacks, of course, include many individuals whose pets are attacked. So include them losing those beloved pets in the attacks. But imagine the calculated, open, brazen, programmed and planned attack or series of attacks that took place against the Kittens in Brick Lane in 2012. several bearded Muslim men took part in the conspiracy to attack the kitten's house. And that is the unique, exclusive kind of insight into the criminality. And we shall be looking at that more shortly. So the item in the Daily Mail reads, dog owners will know the excruciating sadness of losing your best friend. Miranda Hart reveals she is taking a career break after the death of her pet Peggy, who inspired her memoir. So that's the online version of the piece by the Daily Mail. We just got Miranda Hart in there with Peggy. And they also have a picture of her memoir, the cover of the memoir. Now, nothing in that piece refers to housing the pets or pet, or the attack on the housing of a pet or pets. And the attacks mounted by the criminals, including the bearded Muslim man, belonging to the Spitalfields Small Business Association, operating corruptly, dishonestly via the SSBA Community Trust, a registered charity. That kind of attack has never been published. because that kind of attack is inconceivable in ordinary kind of settings. People would not think that a group of people would actually sit down and conspire to mount in broad daylight a brazen series of attacks on the home of a number of kittens. And as far as we can see, there is nothing. There is no such account anywhere in published in the sort of book form, in the conventionally understood and known form and format as books or in journal articles or featured in any known, accessible at this time, television program. So therefore, what we are doing here is introducing a lot of facts, lot of evidence that has not been publicly known anywhere. As we said, the condition being that if anything like that exists, we haven't so far at this time, up to this time, been aware of that. If at a later time, an occasion, we are made aware of that, or the existence of any such material information, an incident or episode, we shall of course update our publication. There will be no need to amend the accuracy of what we have already been saying. We shall have to be standing by what we have been saying so far, and we shall be only adding as updates any new information that comes to our attention afterwards. So back to Brick Lane and back to the atrocities that were plotted by 3 or 4 bearded Muslim men connected with, let's say, the Spitalfields Small Business Association, based at 7-15 Greater Rex Street, London E1 5NF. Now those bearded Muslim criminals, criminal as defined, look up the criminal, that is the sense in which we are using criminal and criminals, the plural. Those criminals were plotting various crimes throughout the previous 11 years. The previous 11 years is important because our campaign and our movement got involved in a dimension of activities warranted by the evidence that the East End of London was under attack from the big business and City of London. So our movement decided to get involved in 2001. That is July 2001. So from July 2001 up to the first day of the month of Ramadan in 2012, that was the month before August, we were simultaneously, that is side by side with, doing the necessary work in defending the community against big business, the City of London and their associates and stooges and the central government in the UK. We were also actively monitoring the behavior and the kind of plots and the criminality on the part of those bearded ones. So that was 11 years. What we are saying here also dispels the myth that Muslims, within their own kind of demography, within their own kind of population, within the setting of their own kind of location, if you like, or locality, are essentially active as innocent persons. That is not the case. And the fact that that is not the case is borne out by the evidence that we are here referring to, and we have elsewhere knowledge of, sight of, and have referred to. Not just about these particular bearded Muslims, criminals, but about other bearded and unbearded, non-bearded Muslim criminal men and Muslim criminal women. That includes most of the publicly known careerists and servers and recipients of various contracts and assignments of stoogery and agency for crimes and criminality. So when we say that the police are not held to account, we do not say that because we have a particular motivation to attack, quote, the police. We don't. But the police need to be held to account for their own sakes and for their own safety and therefore own rights, individual police men and women. Because if they are let loose without being held to account, then the decisions they make may constitute and may actually be criminal decisions violating other people's rights, and the police are not in existence to violate people's rights. They are to protect people. Similarly, when we say that the Muslims in the Muslim community, men and women, are committing crimes against other people and against the environment and against society, we don't say that because we have got a target X or Y, because we have to target them for its own sake. We don't. We are only referring to the actual conduct and identifying the individuals responsible for the wrong and criminal and dangerous and detrimental and harmful conduct. Think about the difference we are drawing here. So when we say that this adulterous, racist white woman with a record of criminality in her life was aided and abetted by the Muslim, bearded Muslim criminals, man, we don't describe this woman as an adulterous criminal with a sick-makingly long list of criminality and misconduct and bad behavior and antisocial involvement because we have a target in her. We don't. We are only referring to her behavior after she did the wrongs and the crimes, committed the crimes, causing the damages and the detriments and the harms and the violations. So think about the distinction we are making. So when we say that the incumbent in the so-called post of cabinet member in the name of housing during the 5 calendar years when Lutfur Rahman was the so-called mayor in the post of the corrupt and criminal post of mayor in the name of Tower Hamlets. We don't refer to her because we have any need or intention ever to target her, other than for reasons of her duties owed to the people in the Borough of Tower Hamlets, to tell the truth and to defend and protect the rights of those who are being violated and attacked by the corrupt criminals in posts within the council during that time. The most criminal of those criminals being Steve Hill. Steve Hill is a criminal, racist, liar who has been serially harassing literally hundreds of people, thousands of people in Tower Hamlets, with the complicity during those 5 years that we referred to, and since then, the complicity of the elected councillors in posts. And during those 5 years, the complicity was delivered by Rabina Khan in post during what they call in the bureaucracy Lutfur Rahman's pleasure to have her in post at Tower Hamlets Council's expense or the community's expense in that post, corruptly and misleadingly and dishonestly peddled as the cabinet member, quote, for housing. She was in that post against most people's rights to housing. She lied, as did Lutfur Rahman, as did Steve Hill, as did the entirety of the corrupt criminal cabal in post during those 5 years. And these criminals and liars aided and abetted the liars of Spitalfields, Small Business Association of the Spitalfields, SSBA Community Trust, who colluded with the criminals carrying out their attacks on the Kitten's house in August 2012. We have no intention, we have no need to attack their personalities or their identities without there being absolute urgent need to identify them as based on the damage they have done, the harm they have done, and the lies they have perpetrated, and the cruelty they have inflicted and have colluded in inflicting on the 3 kittens, and the damage they have done in connection with those attacks on the Kitten's house in August 2012, the impact of which attacks are still being felt and will be felt for a long time. The reason why we are publishing these, simple. Society deserves better than these sorts of persons in positions of control, either of an organization like the SSBA Community Trust or of any position in the so-called elected council. Society includes individuals. Society includes innocent, absolutely innocent and defenseless kittens. The current existing legislation in UK about protection of cats is ridiculously inadequate and out of date. It's criminally negligent and stupid of the current parliament not to have initiated a thorough updating set of legislation so that true protection can be delivered and provided to kittens, to dogs like Peggy, and other animals, including foxes. We shall come to the particular visit by the particular fox to that kitten's house. We shall come to that later in due course. Not necessarily in this part, but we shall do that in due course. There is Peggy being seen on a television program where they say the Kylie Minogue was there appearing. There's Kylie Minogue being pictured with Peggy. And Miranda Hart, of course, is holding Peggy on that program. Now, what would the Daily Mail say about even 1% of the actual facts of the criminality and the cruelty inflicted on the kitten's house by the criminals of the SSBA Community Trust in collusion with and aided and abetted by Rabina Khan and Lutfur Rahman and Aman Dalby and Colin Cormack and other criminally active holders of posts in Tower Hamlets Council, which posts holders were allowed impunity from accountability by any existing legal framework, including by the Crown Prosecution Service, the Director of Public Prosecution at the time being a man called Keir Starmer, who was told about the attacks ongoing and who remained silent. We shall come to the actual questioning as to why he remained silent. We shall come to that in a minute. That is Miranda Hart in a close-up picture of her with Peggy. Imagine somebody attacking Peggy in a fraction of the way with the cruelty that the racist woman called Stephanie McDonald, the racist criminal, the adulterous criminal racist liar, was set on, was kind of triggered, engineered unleashed to have the attacks on the kitten's house carried out. And we shall come to specifically representative, let's say, the textual mental frames of the various stages and acts of the attacks. There was a woman employed at the now defunct women's group called HEBA, H-E-B-A, pronounced HEBA. HEBA was effectively established, not necessarily exclusively individually, but effectively organizationally established by K. Jordan. Remember K. Jordan? K. Jordan and I created the campaign, started the campaign in December 2003 to defend the area against the attack via the Crossrail hole plotted against the Brick Lane area. It wasn't something that I had been involved in before because I had other commitments and other activities taking up more time than I had available. Again, defending other interests and rights. But this one was so serious, this plot against the area by Crossrail or through Crossrail, and there was no defense against that attack. No defense by the local council, no defense by the elected local parliamentarians or councillors. And there was nothing that I could see that could be done effectively to stop the plan, stop the Crossrail hole by going to court as such. And of course, the police were not relevant because it was not a criminal kind of, let's say, clinically defined criminality. It was a civil plot which had the criminal impact, but it wasn't in the framework of the criminal law as such to begin with. It was an act of vandalism and corruption and criminality being perpetrated via the device of Parliament, Parliamentary Act of Parliament. So what we had come across was something unprecedented in terms of the contents of the planned act of Parliament. Unprecedented in that the planned act of Parliament was a planned act to give the legitimacy to an attack against a community. So that's what was connected. That campaign was connected with our movement being in any way involved, physically involved with any address in Brick Lane itself. Because the HEBA Women's Project that was independently set up, independently, that is independently of us, our movement. We had no involvement in terms of the actual organization of the HEBA organization prior to our involvement with K. Jordan in 2001. And we shall come to the difference between 2001 and 2003 in due course. Now, our movement is done today, and it has been done from the beginning, by relying on and invoking expressly and transparently and universally and objectively the values of humanity, values of authenticity, the values of transparency, accountability, and opposition to criminality. Whatever sphere, whatever kind of issue we have been doing, and I have been doing as part of the action and campaigns for the movement, have been consistent with these. And quite apart from the monetary, material considerations and factors and elements, the biggest weapon or the biggest assets have been in our continuously, consistently advocating the values of universality, morality, ethics, accountability, and transparency, and fairness, and equality. And this has been the strength as against the weakness of the criminals we have been having to encounter and oppose and identify. And their weakness has been their absence, the lacking in all these qualities. So those are elements have included and ranged from the locally based local council and councillors and the local council paid and council hired post holders and the locally connected elected members of parliament. So from the local area in Tower Hamlets up to the kind of hierarchically, the highest point in parliament, we have encountered all of those. And at every point of encounter, we have deployed the resource, the asset, which is morality, accountability, transparency, truthfulness, and universality and morality, and the values of equality. We have deployed those consistently as we are doing today. And we have been doing since August 2012, and we had been doing before, over decades before the attacks on the Kitten's house carried out in August 2012. Now, these assets and these resources are beyond monetary values, but they represent monetary values. For example, this is just to illustrate the point and get across the facts. David Penick is a member of the House of Peers. David Penick is also notorious or known as one of the alleged opponents of Brexit. And David Penick, of course, was in the House of Peers when the now deceased Anthony Lester, a liberal Democrat kind of member of the House of Peers, was involved in a scandal, in published kind of accounts about a scandal brought to the fore by a woman of Indian background and origin who alleged that Anthony Lester had said to her that if she slept with him, he would make sure that she became a member of the House of Peers. Why we are mentioning this? Because David Penick, to show his actual location in the frame of morality and ethics, now one of the people who came to the defense of Anthony Lester while he was still alive and while this scandal was kind of running its course through the public realm, David Penick defended Lester. And one of the things he did, David Penick, in the House of Peers, was to manipulate the so-called procedures that were allegedly in place for holding members of the House of Peers to account, various misconduct, whatever. So he manipulated and he made excuses, etc. That was his achievement. And he did that by saying that Lester was his friend. Of course, Anthony Lester was at least 30 years older than him. That is my reckoning, but we can check that and see the exact ages of the two. And we can update the actual facts. The reason I'm mentioning Penick is that somebody of that kind of record, that he was making up excuses to defend this person who had been publicly accused of sexual exploitation of such a scale. So he was hired by the Manchester City Football Club, I think about 2 years ago, but we can check that. And he was hired to represent that particular kind of club in connection with a litigation, with a challenge, is a legal challenge, or let's say legalistic challenge against a decision by a Europe-based board of controllers or regulators who had imposed a sanction against the Manchester City Football Club. Now, Manchester City is not the same thing as the Manchester Football Club. Manchester United Football Club is a longer ranging one than the Manchester City, but both are based in Manchester. So let's look up the Manchester City Football Club's hiring records of the David Pennick. Let's see, David Pennick, long before he became a member of the House of Peers, was given space as a columnist, as a kind of legal column writer by the Times. Now he's said that he was born in 1956, age 64. And he's described as a leading barrister. We shall come to that. He was born in Islington on the 7th of March, 1956. And he became a member of the House of Peers as a result of the House of Lords Appointments Commission, which is a corrupt outfit itself. And the corruption is illustrated by the fact that Herman Ousley, one of the original mental slaves and criminals used by racists, was a member of that one. And he abused it and made himself a recipient of the baronness or peerages. And this corruption has been highlighted by a Welsh MP, Chris Bryant. And David Pennick is described here as Jewish and currently married to a woman described as Israeli-born lawyer, Natalie Tregayer-Lewis, in 2003. They got married in 2003. Now, David Pennick was born in 1956, and let's see Anthony Lester. So he was 20 years older. Lester was 20 years older because he was born on 3rd of July, 1936. So they're just under 20 years older than Pennick. And Lester died in August 2020. Now, let's look at what David Pennick did do to back Anthony Lester. So this is what happened in 2 years ago. It says peers, that is members of the House of Peers, they blocked Lester's suspension over harassment claims. The vote stops action against Peer, accused of pressuring women to have sex with him. So this was a piece on Thursday, the 15th of November, 2018, on the Guardian website, byline to the political correspondent at the time, Peter Walker. And it said in the piece, Jasvinder Sangera, a long-time campaigner against forced marriage, told the Guardian she had no faith in anti-harassment efforts of the Lords, after Pierce voted down the punishment imposed on Anthony Lester. Now, this was the defeat on that particular vote in the House of Peers, the defeat that had been engineered by David Pennick. And here is the reference to Pennick. Lord Pennick, also a leading QC, made the argument in the debate that you are entitled to cross-examine or have cross-examination conducted of the person who accuses you. But Sangera's lawyers said they were surprised that Lester complained about the way the inquiry was handled only after it was over. The alleged harassment is said to have taken place around 11 years ago, and Sangera first reported it to parliamentary authorities in November 2017. After an investigation by the Lords Commissioner for Standards, the subcommittee on Lords Conduct recommended Lester be expelled, the first time such action would have been taken. However, Lester appealed, and while the Privilege and Conduct Committee upheld the conclusion, it opted for the suspension, as the rule following expulsion was only introduced in 2015. Sangera told the inquiry that the harassment began after she attended a meeting at the Lords, that is the House of Peers, and missed her evening train. Lester suggested she stay at his London home. He groped her thigh while driving her to the house and made suggestive remarks, she said. The next morning, when his wife had left, Lester chased Sangera around the kitchen, she said. Now, this chasing instantly reminds of Dominique Strauss-Kahn, the president of the IMF at the time, when he stayed in a hotel in New York and took off his clothes and chased the woman who was attending the hotel room as a cleaner. He chased her and he jumped on her, and then her claims were later settled after he paid undisclosed amounts of money to her. So Anthony Lester chased this woman after his wife left their home for whatever place, work or whatever. And this is what David Pennick actually was in denial of when he was making up excuses for Lester to be given the fair opportunity, etc., to have Sangera cross-examined. It was at a later meeting at the Lords, she said, that Lester made the offer. She told the inquiry he even spelled it out, putting her surname in, and asked her how that sounded. The report said Sangera
who was not named in the investigation, but came forward afterwards, provided 6 witnesses, among them a judge, who were able to say she had described the events immediately after she said they had taken place. John McFall, the senior deputy speaker in the Lords, that is House of Lords, the House of Peers, said he was deeply disappointed in the vote, and the Privileges and Conduct Committee would meet next week to decide the next step. I fully support the Commissioner for Standards and the work she has undertaken for many months. Every step of the way, she followed the processes as agreed by the House, and that have not been questioned before today. I'd also like to express my sympathy to the complainant at what must be a very difficult time for her, Lord McFall said. Now, this is important evidence in order to put in context the fitness of David Pennick in being hired by the Manchester City Football Club. Fitness in morality, in ethics, in transparency. We shall come to what he actually achieved, or what was the latest report about his being hired by the Manchester City Football Club. But at this stage, it is important to say that the reason why we are saying anything about the involvement of David Pennick as a hired licensed law trader hired by the Manchester City Football Club is to illustrate the fragility of the ground on which licensed law traders and professionals are paid money for their alleged services. For that particular, what is called retention, David Pennick was paid at a rate of £20,000 every day. So let's go to that one and see what can be traced in published form about Pennick. So the Daily Mail report said at the time, the Mail Online, let's say, it said that on 21st of February 2020, so just under a year ago, Manchester City hired £20,000 a day lawyer who helped block Brexit twice in bid to get that 2-year ban from European football thrown out. Now, the Daily Mail has got its own narrative, their own agenda about Brexit. It's a Brexiteering paper, and as we said, Pennick was an anti-Brexiteer. So they had a go at him in the headline. But let's see the substance of the hiring by the Manchester City. And they're saying, citing the Daily Mirror as the original reporter, Manchester City have hired the lawyer who helped block Brexit twice. Now, that is, as I said, they're having a go at him for opposing Brexit. As the Premier League champions look to overturn their 2-year ban from European football, according to the Mirror. And let's see what the in 2000, they keep going on about other things before getting to the point of that particular story. City chiefs will be hoping he can use his legal expertise to help the club out of the trouble, having been handed a heavy punishment by the UEFA. The club has shelled out £20,000 a day to cover Mr. Pennick's legal costs. European football was rocked last Friday when the governing body announced that the English club were to be banned for 2 years from European competition, as well as slapped with a £25 million fine for serious breaches of financial regulations. The first offense relates to overstating its sponsorship revenue in its accounts. And in the break-even information submitted to UEFA between 2012 and 2016, while failing to cooperate in the investigation. City have expressed their intention to challenge the appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport and hope the issue can be resolved before the summer. City have expressed their intention and to challenge the spread, appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport and hope the issue can be resolved before the summer. That was in February 2020. The ruling leaves the Premier League champions in an ominous position, with question mark raised over the futures of some of their key stars. And they go on about Pennick's role in representing Gina Miller, who was the woman named as the main litigant against the Brexit kind of maneuvering and manipulations by the then government, fronted by Theresa May. And Pennick was also involved in the later Supreme Court challenge by Gina Miller to Boris Johnson's kind of scrapping of Parliament at the time. Now, Pennick is described as one of the top lawyers in this country. And as I have said about Anthony Lester, it is not the honesty, the transparency, the morality, the ethics of the behavior of a particular licensed law trader. It is in the manipulation of the facts and the procedures, which is what McFaul's quoted statement has said. That McFaul said that the processes were complied with by the investigation and everything was correct. So it was Pennick, David Pennick, that actually questioned the thing and took part in delaying and sabotaging the actual expulsion of Anthony Lester from the House of Peers. So if somebody whose skills are to abuse the process, to distort the process, under wearing the guise of a licensed law trader, then he is not morally acting, and yet he is worth £20,000 a day. So if we apply the work involved and the work carried out at a degree and a level of intensity, demanding attention, demanding application of evidence gathering, evidence testing, fact checks testing and research. And if we then apply the criteria that presumably David Pennick benefits from as he collects or as he demands or as he requires being paid 20,000 pounds in legal costs. Then the costs, equivalent costs in defending the kitten's house and in fending off the attacks would amount to David Pennick's daily rate of 20,000 pounds, many times over. That's a factual cost related point we make here. And what we are saying there is that the attackers who plotted, who mounted and carried out the attacks on the kitten's house numbered between 12 and 14 or even higher. And we said yesterday that a decision was made. Decision had to be made by giving absolute priority to the safeguarding of the kittens under attack. So any action that could be taken that would entail physical confrontation with the attackers had the direct likelihood of being a violent one, because it would be physically stopping the attackers. And any violent physical activity of that nature would have further distressed the kittens. They were in hiding. Two of them were in hiding and one was visible, but was severely distressed. And it was distressed by that woman, racist woman, who was fronting the assault while being watched by a number of bearded men and a number of women and others. So a decision was made, and I made the decision in order to prevent any further physical aggravation to be caused to or near the kittens already undergoing severe distress